Hey everybody, this is Chokwe Pitchford, Executive Director of Berrien Forward. I am coming in our first ever series of looking at the national map. So something that I've been doing for a very long time is going to a site called 270 to Win. 270 to Win is a kind of political aggregate where it looks at every single state in the union, from California to Michigan to Pennsylvania and Florida, and everything in between. And it assigns the appropriate electoral votes for each one of those states. And it allows you, as a consumer, to go through and kind of pick where do you think these states are going to land for each respective political candidate. With the Michigan primaries just wrapping up and Joe Biden and Donald Trump easily gaining the delegates from the state of Michigan to go to the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, it is safe to assume that we will be seeing a rematch between the former president and the current president in 2024. So here at Berrien Forward, we want to honor our mission of civic engagement and civic education by me today just walking you through this map. What are some of the thoughts and where are the 2024 elections standing as of March 3rd, 2024? So let's jump right into this, right? The first thing you can do, and you can see pretty simply, is there are a host of states around the country that are either going to go Democratic or they're going to go Republican. A lot of this is due to increased polarization over the last 10 or 20 years, where some states, like back when Bill Clinton was running for president, you could win some southern states as a Democrat. And if you look back when Ronald Reagan had his 2 landslides in the 80s, he was winning states like California, which would be unthinkable today for a Republican candidate. So let's go through first and mark all the safe blue states. These are states like Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii. Start making our way through here. Illinois, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., Maine, Vermont, New York, Virginia. Going through finding the rest, making sure that we're not missing out anybody. I think you can throw Colorado in that column as of how it's been voting in the last few years. Minnesota as well, I would throw into that column. And we're going to, rightly so, do the same thing for the Republican candidate, most likely going to be former President Donald Trump. You're looking at North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. You're probably looking at Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina as states that are absolutely going to go Republican. And before I get flamed in the comments, let me add in Alaska to that list as well, which is a state that I think is going to be more competitive in the next few years. But as of right now, I think Alaska is in the safe Republican column. Some of these might be more likely, depending on if some of the legal problems that the former president is having end up having a larger impact on him as an individual. You can see certain states, possibly a state like Iowa, possibly a state like maybe South Carolina, moving down to the likely category, where likely, lean, and safe, let me just say what those mean. So safe is anything you're winning with more than 10 points. So Gretchen Whitmer in 2022 won Michigan by my metric by a safe margin. She won by more than 10 points. Any place where you're winning by more than 5 or up to 5 points, 5 points or more, that's going to be likely. So if you're getting a 6-point, 7-point victory, you're walking away with 55, 56, 57% of the vote. I would put that in the likely category. And then leans is anything between 1 and 3%. So if you see someone has, they've won by 1.7, they've won by 2 points, we would put that in the lean category. And toss-up is, of course, it could go either way, all the way down to Election Day. So let's move South Carolina and Iowa back to safe. And let's go through and start categorizing as we sit right now some of the swing states. One low-hanging fruit, I will say, after seeing Nikki Haley's performance in the New Hampshire primary, New Hampshire is the type of state where it's an extremely educated, well-informed, engaged population, and it is where Donald Trump so far has had his worst showing in the Republican primaries. So with that dynamic, I think if Nikki Haley, based on some polling, and if we jump over to something like 538 politics polls, you can see if it's Biden versus Nikki Haley in every single poll, there is no daylight. She is beating him every which way. However, if it's Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I think the Nikki Haley supporters in New Hampshire overwhelmingly will go to Joe Biden. And I think Joe Biden will then carry New Hampshire by a lean to likely category. But I'm going to put it as lean, and we'll discuss why later. Next up on the list, let's work our way from the West Coast to the East Coast. On the West Coast, we're going to look at Nevada. I think Nevada is the type of state where you've seen popular senators, you've seen individuals in the Democratic Party be able to get elected in Nevada. We did lose the governor's race in Nevada in 2022. However, I think it's right to think about this from a very high level. There's a chance that we lose Nevada in 2024 because of some of the regressions that President Biden is seeing with some of the core constituencies that exist in the state of Nevada. I also think it's worth pointing out that the immigration issue, after the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, blocked any movement on a bipartisan border bill that came out of the Senate that had the president giving up a lot of ground on issues that traditionally Democrats wouldn't have given up ground on. I think any place near the border right now is probably leaning a bit more conservative because of the immigration issue being such a salient one, overtaking inflation in the economy for the first time in recent polling. So currently, I am going to put Nevada as a lean GOP state. Now, I'm going to contradict what I just said here in Arizona. I think Arizona is somewhere where you could see a groundswell against President Biden. I also believe that there is a chance that someone like Ruben Gallego, who's running for Senate in Arizona against Kerry Lake. Kerry Lake ran for governor of Arizona in 2022 and lost to now incumbent governor Katie Hobbs. I think if it's Ruben Gallego versus Kerry Lake in a one-to-one fight, without Kyrsten Sinema, the incumbent senator who changed her party from Democratic to Republican, if you see Kyrsten Sinema not run in this primary, which she's running out of time to file, I think you will see Ruben Gallego beat Kerry Lake in Arizona, though it could be narrow. I think he would do so. And if Ruben Gallego is winning the state of Arizona, I think his charisma and popularity and his campaign and the way it's being run, I think you could see Arizona lean blue in 2024. It could be lean. I'm very tempted to put it in the toss-up category and keep it in the toss-up category. But I am going to say if Ruben Gallego is able to have a one-on-one with Kerry Lake, and Biden gets to continue to talk about the fact that the Republican Party has been the one that's blocked the bipartisan immigration deal in the Senate, then I think there is a chance that he could win a state like Arizona. I think subsequently he carries New Mexico. Now, what does that mean? If he's carrying New Mexico and he's carrying Arizona but losing Nevada, I think a lot of it is, in 2020, I've always said, Joe Biden didn't necessarily win the presidency. He is president, right? He won the most votes. He got the most electoral college votes. But a massive majority of people were voting against Donald Trump. In 2024, the dynamic has switched. Now there are going to be a mass amount of people who are going to be upset and voting against President Biden, whether it's from domestic political issues like the economy or infrastructure or immigration, foreign policy like what's happening with Israel and Palestine. You're going to have individuals who are voting specifically about Ukraine and Russia, maybe on the Republican side, that believe that we should be protecting our allies. So I think you're going to see irregularities in this election. Next up, we're going to talk about Texas. And that is a place that I'm leaving as a toss-up, and it's probably going to be the crux of the decision for me to put this video out and say that we need to pay attention to the state of Texas. Whether it's massive demographic shifts, whether it's income or not income, I apologize, whether it's people moving to Texas and starting to raise the population of Texas, whether it's the incumbent Senator Ted Cruz being extremely unpopular, whether it's Biden being able to navigate this immigration issue in a way that may paint him as someone that was willing to go far enough to address it, And the Republican Party told him no. And people uniquely see that as a political partisan fight. And add on top of that, Colin Allred running a campaign in Texas that is seeing him, if we go over to polls at 538 and we go to the state of Texas, you have Colin Allred up 15 points in the primary, but you have him tied in a poll with Ted Cruz in a state that historically has been the bastion of conservatism when it comes to electoral college votes. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a chance here that Colin Allred could beat Ted Cruz, which, as you see again here, National Public Affairs have them tied. There are some polls, right, have Ted Cruz up 14 points that show that this is not a competitive race. But how much of that is these individuals don't know the name? They haven't met Colin Allred. They haven't heard about him. There hasn't been the ads. There hasn't been the spending, which all ends up happening after Memorial Day. I am going to leave Texas as a toss-up or possibly a lean red at the moment, with the chance that if Colin Allred wins the state of Texas, maybe Joe Biden doesn't win it. Maybe he gets 48, 49%, and Ted Cruz's unpopularity bolsters Colin Allred into the United States Senate. I think that cues up a massive conversation in this country from both parties about reforming the Electoral College. Because if there's any world where a Democrat wins the state of Texas, I have not talked about Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, or Florida. And with just winning the solid blue states and winning Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, Joe Biden is elected president of the United States, and the election is over right there. So we're going to leave it in the toss-up column for now. Actually, I'm going to contradict myself. I'm going to leave it in the lean red column because my priors and my intuition say we're about a cycle off. But Texas flipping blue will be the biggest political story of the decade, bar none. Let's move over to Florida. I think Florida is going to go on a likely margin. Florida has gone extremely to the right ever since the election of Ron DeSantis and then his subsequent run for president of the United States, where he bowed out and endorsed Donald Trump, going back to be governor of Florida. He won by nearly 20 points back in 2022, one of the biggest landslides for a Republican candidate in the history of the state of Florida, which then bolstered him to make a run for the presidency. I think Florida is somewhere that over time we can make inroads with and start to rebuild, but I think Florida right now is gone on the map. Georgia is interesting because Joe Biden was one of the first Democrats in the 21st century to win the state of Georgia in a presidential election. He won it narrowly in 2020. He won narrowly, and then in the runoff between Warnock and Ossoff and Katie Loeffler and David Perdue, Donald Trump told his supporters, do not go out and vote, do not go out and vote, the election has been rigged, which, side note, I'd like to tell everyone that Dominion is my favorite voting system, and I walk into the booth sometimes, as Roy Jones said at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and ask, you guys got that Dominion? Because I am not trying to get sued, so I'm going to say again, Dominion voting systems, Dominion voting systems, Dominion voting systems. Donald Trump said that the election was stolen, and a lot of Republicans did not turn out to vote in 2020 in the Georgia Senate runoff. I don't think that's going to be the case in 2024. The question is whether or not the excitement is there for Joe Biden, whether or not the turnout in the Atlanta suburbs are there for Joe Biden, whether or not black turnout is there for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or whether muted black turnout in the suburbs or just muted Democratic turnout in general is washed out by rural farmers and rural voters coming out and voting en masse for Donald Trump. I think as it sits right now, specifically, if we look at some of the polling, just want to go take a look at Georgia really quickly. There it is. Trump plus 6, Trump plus 7, Trump plus 18, Trump plus 10, Trump plus 9. You saw one poll that had Biden up 6 on Haley in Georgia, but there has not been a poll in a very long time that's shown Joe Biden winning the state of Georgia. So as of right now, we're going to characterize Georgia as lean red. North Carolina, I think could be interesting. There's a interesting governor's race happening there with Mark Wayne Robinson. He's a African American Republican who, by all accounts and measures, if you look at kind of what he says publicly, definitely stand against some of the things that Berrien Forward stands for, whether it's his stance on abortion or women's rights or LGBTQ rights or kind of this fundamentalist view that he has of the world. That being said, North Carolina is always just right there for the Democratic Party. There have been multiple elections, whether it was 2012, 2016, 2020, where we come extremely close between 46, 47, 48, 49% of the vote to almost flip the state of North Carolina. But I think because of Joe Biden's unpopularity and the polling as of today, we are going to put North Carolina as lean Republican, if not likely Republican, but we're going to leave it at lean. Because I think polarization is so high. If a state is considered a toss-up or a swing state, it is most likely going to be within the lean to likely margin, right? And it's probably going to be leaning towards 1, 2, or 3 point victories because Democrats at the end of the day, I think, are going to hold their nose or enthusiastically vote for Joe Biden. I think Republicans are going to hold their nose and or enthusiastically vote for Donald Trump. There may be some segment of Republicans that say the abortion issue, the Alabama IVF issue, right? Ukraine, Israel, domestic, the economy coming back, inflation cooling, record jobs numbers, all the things that the president likes to talk about. I think you're going to have some Republicans that say, I would rather 4 more years of the Biden administration where I don't agree with him on everything than 4 more years of a Trump administration where if you read something like Project 2025, which we'll be covering in the future, it terrifies a lot of people. So now, I didn't characterize Indiana. Indiana is definitely a safe Republican state. And I think also to that point, Ohio is going to be a likely Republican state without much being contested there. I think Sherrod Brown has a chance to win that Senate race. We will cover the United States Senate in a subsequent video. So now we are down to the 3 states that are going to make or break this election. This is considered the blue wall. The blue wall in politics is Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those 4 states usually decide who is going to be the president of the United States. In 2016, they all voted for Donald Trump besides Minnesota. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania all voted for Donald Trump in 2016 by narrow margins against Hillary Clinton. In 2020, all 3 of them voted for Joe Biden, and I assume all 3 of them, if they don't vote the same, they're going to vote pretty similarly for the nominee in 2024, or the Democratic or Republican side, and they will be the deciding factor on who becomes president of the United States. Currently, I think Wisconsin is lean red. I think Wisconsin has the type of demographic, the type of voter that is extremely upset right now with the way the country is. I think there are a lot of voters who are extremely energized to vote for Donald Trump. I think it was a close state in 2022. It was a close state in 2020. And I think unless there is a massive shift at the moment in public sentiment around President Biden, he is going to truly struggle in a state like Wisconsin. On the flip side, I think Pennsylvania is lean to likely Democrat. Pennsylvania is exactly the type of state that Joe Biden, his entire administration, has been talking to the working class, blue collar worker in Pennsylvania who may have seen jobs go overseas. They may have seen, the corporate bailouts. They may have seen many things over the last 20 years. But Joe Biden's labor policies, Joe Biden showing up in Michigan on the picket line, there have been things that he has done, standing next to Sean Fain, having an economic agenda with the CHIPS Act, bringing manufacturing back to America, the Inflation Reduction Act, all the things that he's trying to do. I think it's been hyper-focused on a state like Pennsylvania. And if we go back to the polling, just to back up my theory, it's one of the places where you see Bob Casey up 10 points, Bob Casey up 1. Now you have Trump up 8 in some polls, but you actually see some polls that have Biden up. Is one of the few states where there are consistently, you will see Joe Biden beating Donald Trump in the state of Pennsylvania. So on my list, we will put Pennsylvania as lean Democratic, which means the entire election, in my opinion, and this is not biased because we are an organization based in Michigan, But I think the entirety of the 2024 election will come down to who wins the state of Michigan. Whether the real fears and anger and bewilderment and loss that the people in Dearborn have suffered with the war between Israel and Palestine and the amount of innocent civilians who have been killed, and what we're all seeing as a situation that needs to come to an end. It's a situation that we want to see a peaceful resolution. A lot of people want to see a two-state solution. We're a nonprofit in Southwest Michigan focused on Berrien County. I'm not going to speak a whole lot about national politics, but that is something that is uniquely affecting the state of Michigan. We saw over 100,000 ballots cast for uncommitted in the Democratic primary in Michigan for the presidency. I think there is a constituency there that is pleading out to Joe Biden to do something differently. On the same side, we have Alyssa Slotkin and Hill Harper running for the United States Senate, where Harper and Alyssa Slotkin are running against each other on the Democratic side. And then you have Mike Rogers, Peter Meyer, and Justin Amash running for the Republican nomination to the United States Senate. You had James Craig, the former police chief of the city of Detroit, now bowing out of the race, saying that he's going to find other things to run for. With that dynamic at the top, if you see someone like an Alyssa Slotkin make it to the general election, who Berrien Forward has had the opportunity to interview and talk to, you'll be able to find that on our YouTube page to see that conversation. But for that dynamic to exist, if it's Alyssa Slotkin versus someone like a Justin Amash or a Peter Meyer or a Mike Roger, that's going to be a tight race, right? Because they all represent a somewhat quote-unquote new faction of the Republican Party where they're still trying to dance around the Trump issue. And you have a strong incumbent representative in Alyssa Slotkin, who's raised a lot of money, who knows how to speak the language of Michigan, really gives off those Michigan vibes. And then you have Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, where Donald Trump has not, he won Michigan one time in 2016, lost it in 2020. Gretchen Whitmer got reelected by 10 points, who was our governor, got reelected by 10 points in 2022. And then you had her flip the House and the Senate for the first time in 40 years in Michigan. So Michigan has a Democratic bend to it. We want to elect Democratic candidates. It's whether or not Joe Biden's popularity in the state of Michigan can improve. And we're starting to see some of the polling tick back up for Joe Biden in Michigan. But I cannot say it's not going to be close. Right now, they're even in some polls. A lot of them show Mike Rogers winning the Republican primary, but you also have some polls with Trump up 1, Trump up 2, Slotkin up 1 on Rogers. So Michigan is going to be tight. I think a place like Berrien County is prime for the realignment that has happened, where we elected our first state representative to Lansing in this area, who was a Democrat, Joey B. Andrews, for the first time since the Civil Rights Act was passed. There is a momentum happening in Michigan, but it's whether or not at the ground level, the Republican or the Democratic Party is able to excite their voters to vote for someone that they don't necessarily have the highest favorables for. They don't actually have the highest approval rating for. Joe Biden lost about 100,000 votes to uncommitted. Donald Trump lost a sizable, 25% of the state. He's an incumbent president, essentially. He's running for his third go at the office, but what he's calling his third term. This is the third time he's been the Republican nominee. It's obvious that he's going to get 60, 70, 80% of the vote. It is actually shocking he's not getting 90 to 95% of the vote when these individuals have seen his name on the ballot now 3 times over the last so many years. For 25% of those voters to be voting for Nikki Haley, who is extremely out in public saying that he should not be the nominee, he's a threat to the country, he's a threat to women, all of these things. I think that 25% of the vote is going to have to find a new political home if Nikki Haley is not the nominee. And if that is the case, I think a lot of those voters may hold their nose and vote for President Biden, because they are going to see over the summer with the trials and all these different things that it's quite tough to see a world where Donald Trump gets reelected. But I can see a world where he looks and he comes extremely close, because there are people who believe in his message. They believe they have been left behind. They believe that the political system does not see them. And I think in the long run, in the Democratic Party, progressive organizations, all the groups that care about civic engagement, independence, we've got to address that feeling that a lot of those individuals have. We've got to find a way to start to talk about it so that we don't end up repeating this over and over and over again, with new insurgent candidates fomenting these feelings inside of us, where we know if you sit down with someone at a table and have a conversation, you're going to find more things that you have in common than things that you don't. But I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders in our communities, as people who are trying to do this civic engagement work, to not just write off the Trump voter, right? To actually try to understand where it's coming from so that we don't repeat it. So in my final estimation here, I believe that Michigan, in a very, 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 very slight edge, goes to Joe Biden in 2024, meaning with 271 votes, electoral votes to 267, I believe Joe Biden will be reelected to the presidency of the United States. I think it will be one of the closest elections we have ever seen in American history. If a single state on this map changes, that changes the outcome. If Donald Trump wins Arizona, he is president of the United States. If Joe Biden wins Georgia, it's an even bigger victory for him. If Joe Biden loses Pennsylvania, he loses the presidency of the United States. So I think there are many ways that this can go. I think this is something that I'm going to continually do throughout the year, based on polling, based on outlooks, based on issues that are transient at the moment, issues that are out there in the community that are being pervasive, that are being talked about. I'm going to update you based on those things. I'm going to update you based on things like Project 2025, the Republican primary polling, Super Tuesday, election night in Berrien County, kind of aftermath, diving into the numbers. So if you care about this, if you want to see more of this content, excuse me, this is my first time recording myself in a video like this. It took a lot of courage to just get behind a microphone, start recording my screen, and talk for 27 minutes. But I'm excited, if you listen to this point, to say thank you so much for believing in this type of content and making political discourse something that, can be cool again, something that we can start to talk about our electoral system and our democratic system in a very deep and real way. So I want to thank you for watching this video. Again, my name is Chokwe Pitchford. I am the Executive Director of Berrien Forward, and I cannot wait to make more content for you guys so we can continue to talk about how to save our country. Thank you.